similar delayed superior beginnings. Duke sat at the back of the works while his restoration took place after being buried in a shed on his old railway. Thankfully, he was discovered by the thin and fat clergyman, along with Fergus Duncan, the controller of the small railway, which just so happened to occupy nearly 10 miles of Duke's old line, though that was a bit of an issue for the grace-named engine. "I can't believe they didn't extend to the mountain section," he complained in his elderly, irritable manner. "Those young engines need the exercise." "Or maybe they need to stay low and easy," replied a workman. "I don't even know if they're able to climb it." "Well, they should at least try to reach there and see. Over half the Mid Sodor was on that mountain. Those small engines shouldn't just go a measly 10 miles and leave the mountain to rot more than me." "Not necessarily," said the workman. "Surprisingly, through all the years it was abandoned, your old line didn't have a single garden of weeds and vegetation sprouting between the rails. You have to thank the spoils from the old mines for that, which is why the small railway was built in the first place, to use them." But all the workmen received in response was a grumpy face that hated their viewpoint tested. Though his thoughts were interrupted when Douglas puffed in with a purple narrow-gauge engine on his flatbed. He was from the mountain railway in the center of the island. "Now that's an engine who can climb mountains," the workman admired. Duke just ignored him. "Good day, sir," the engine said. "You're Duke, the lost engine. I've heard so much about you." "I've heard of you too," Duke said humbly. "Reading your nameplate, you're no doubt Culdee, named after the mountain your railway climbs." "That's right," he said, smiling. "I couldn't wait to see you while my fire bars were being mended." "Wait," Duke pondered. "I thought you mountaineers were repaired in Switzerland. Scarloey told me about your chat with him when returning from your overhaul."
"Ah," said Culdee, chuckling. "We used to be, but that requires an expensive trip overseas, costing the manager more than his own house. Luckily, the Fat Controller was kind enough to make the works accessible for engines of all gauges. Now we don't have to spend weeks of boredom being stuck in the middle of the ocean."
Culdee was lowered by a crane onto a piece of track with a middle rack rail, and when Douglas left, the two engines began chatting like old friends, discussing their histories on each of their respective railways, and found that there were some similarities between them, such as being in the same mountainous region.
"You should be very proud that you held on like a bulldog and saved the handle, or falcon in your case, from falling off a cliff," Culdee said deeply. "Our number one Godred wasn't so lucky."
Duke silently agreed.
"I remember how the Mid Sodor once planned to connect to your line," he said, trying to change the subject. "But the mountain railway only runs in the spring to fall, so it would have been pointless to join a brainchild that's only in service half the year."
There was one similarity, however, between their railways that both found most intriguing: how difficult and delayed it was to get their homes up and running, thanks to some men in higher power.
"The landowner of the mountain," explained Culdee, "was against the idea of a railway going up his property, saying it would spoil the natural beauty of the mountain. Your new railway, the Scarloey Railway, jumped at the opportunity with tour trains by wagonettes to the mountain, which devastated the popularity of the fortified town below, neighboring the tallest mountain on the island. That's why the people begged the landowner to change his mind, in which he thankfully did. After his daughter cut the first sod, construction officially began, and the rest is history."
"I can safely join your club," Duke said empathetically. "My old line was also disapproved. During construction, some scanty clearances in the mountain tunnels were made to save money. The inspector, however, was not okay with this, even though he couldn't fault anything else. Eventually, after a lot of persuasion, he reluctantly agreed, though it was a long few months before he came back for a second visit, and in that time, I was stuck in my shed, not allowed to be in service on an unopened railway, especially as a young engine. I was so upset and impatient, sitting there doing nothing as the seasons turned cooler, and thinking the inspector would never come back and propose the uncertain future of the Mid Sodor Railway."
He paused impressively.
Fortunately, after all that waiting, it was finally approved and opened, though I was so traumatically impatient after that, not wanting anything to get in the way of being on time and running the railway smoothly. I admit that even my behavior back then would never suit his grace, for I was so reckless that all my passengers jolted up and down on top of each other. Some wanted to jump out the coaches, but they couldn't. One of the requirements the inspector gave out for the railway to open was that all carriage windows were locked between stations, so the passengers were trapped, and all because they couldn't ride the railway sooner.
Duke chuckled in nostalgia.
Obviously, I'm a lot more patient and wiser now, but boy, was that not the best start of my life, was it?
No, indeed, chuckled Culdee. A huge coincidence that before your railway opened and after it closed, you were stuck in your shed uncertain of hope. Though a few months before opening is way less than being buried for years in earth and bushes. At least you're saved and in good hands now. But I just realized something.
What's that?
Duke asked. Once you're restored, you're going to have to get used to riding the rails again after so long, and you'll be just as clumsy and reckless as you were in the beginning of your old line.
Hopefully not too out of touch,
the old engine snickered.
Both of them laughed their funnels off and continued chatting as their repairs began.